so where are we in the sanctuary? We are now looking at the third paragraph of the Shema, which can be found 158, I think. Hold on. For those at home, you can find it on page 150. Hold it, wrong. 156. 156. All right, so we've gone through, just to give you a reference on where we are. We talked about the Shema and its blessings. We dealt with the blessing of creation. We dealt with the blessing of revelation. We have dealt with the line of Shema, the first paragraph of Shema. I'm skipping the second paragraph because it's essentially the same message about if you do this, then God will reward you. We talked about that in an earlier session. It's sort of a repeat of that theme, all right? But we downplay that theme a lot. How do we do it in the synagogue? It's all in paragraph we never sing. We do it quietly. What's that? No, the Hayim Shemoah, the second paragraph of the Shema. So you have Yahavta, the Hayim Shemoah, and Vayomer. No one ever sings the second paragraph because they don't want to highlight the fact that we have a problem with this theology. If you're good, you get prizes, and if you're bad, you don't. Well, if it works in your world, good for you. It hasn't worked for me, I know that. Let's switch glasses here. All right, so it starts out, look at the English on this page here. We're about halfway down. Adonai said to Moses. That's where we're at. That's where we're starting. Vayomer Adonai, and God spoke to Moses. God said to Moses, saying, the word lemor, anytime you see the word lemor, it basically means here comes a quote. Saying. In other words, here comes a quote.
But it's kind of repetitive.
It is. It is, but it's really, just imagine the word lemor as quotation marks. Okay? Daber el bnei Yisrael. Speak to the children of Israel. Judaism has never been an esoteric religion where all the practices are known only by the elite, which Christianity was until the printing press. Judaism has never been that. It has been a religion of the masses. Speak to the people of Israel and tell them all the commandments. That's what we're doing here, okay? This third paragraph, its focus, you hear the word tzitzit over and over and over and over. This paragraph is about the tzitzit. That's its primary message. The reason for the observance of the tzitzit, of putting them on your talit, I had a talis here. We all know what a talis is. I keep forgetting which class is which. You've all seen the talis, okay? All right, and you have the fringes, and I'll show you something about it in just a second. Is to remind us to look upon them and remember the commandments, and to keep us from acting out the heretical thoughts that might be going through our minds. To make wise choices guided by what we think God would want of us.
So, can you wear a tzitzit if you have not been?
Yes, because, look, so let me get this bar bat mitzvah thing. The reality is you become a bar bat mitzvah at the age of 13 or 12 in a day for a woman, whether or not you have a ceremony. You don't need a ceremony. It's not like, well, you know what? I'm not going to have the ceremony, and therefore I won't be obligated to the commandments. Wrong. Wrong. You are. The ceremony is a public statement of that. But the obligations are upon you whether or not. And bar mitzvah, as the son of commandments, you take on those commandments at that age whether or not you have a public ceremony. You are obligated. You can't get out of it by not having a ceremony. Absolutely. Not only is it perfectly okay, you're obligated theoretically to do so. It's a mitzvah. It's a commandment. All right? What's that? Nope. So the question becomes, how do the tzitzit serve this function of reminding us? And the rabbis offer a couple suggestions. Number one, when you dress in a certain way, it changes how you understand yourself and the world. If you're wearing a bride's wedding dress, you don't have to be reminded of the moment, right? You're standing there in this white dress. It tells you you've created a mindset. If you're in a soldier's uniform, you know what you're doing. You know where your loyalties lie, what your obligations go with that. Clothing, when you pick your clothing in the morning, you're setting a tone for the rest of the day. If you wear dress clothes or you wear play clothes. It's one of the reasons, like when I ran the religious school, I would not allow baseball caps instead of a kippah. Not because it's not halakhic, it's perfectly fine halakhically, but mindset. It creates, we're on a ball field. It's the equivalent of being on a ball field. And I love baseball. It's not a matter of I hate baseball. I love it. You know, I'm a giant Yankee fan. That's not the issue. It creates a mindset. Okay? So, what's that? Oh, big inning. In the beginning, in the big inning.
Only you.
Rashi played with this, and you have this on this sheet. Rashi says, how do we get from the tzitzit to 613? And he says, okay, let's do the following. Let's take the word. Anybody who's been to a bar mitzvah workshop with me has heard this before, and I apologize. Take the word tzitzit. The tzadi of tzitzit, all the letters have a numerical value. Aleph is 1, Bet is 2, Gimel is 3. Tzadi has a numerical value of 90. It's followed by a yud, 10. 90 and 10, we're up to 100. The next letter is a tzadi, and the next letter after that is a yud, another 100. We're up to 200. The last letter is a tav, which has the value of 400. So 200 plus 400, please tell me it's 600 or I'm leaving. Okay, thank you. All right. So now we have a problem. We have 600, and we need to get to 613. Okay? If you look at a tzitzit, this is Rashi in play. Okay? You'll see there are 8 strands in each one of them. 600 plus 8, 608. Want to guess how many knots are in the tzitzit? 5. Okay? 5, 8, 13, 600, 613. Rashi says, when I look at the tzitzit, I think of 613 commandments. So good. So Maimonides has his list. Somebody else has their list. No, there isn't a definitive list. How do you get to 613? There is not. The rabbis each have their own versions of it historically, but where they got to 613, somebody probably originally sat down and said, I found 613. That became the rule, and then everybody began looking to say, okay, what are the 613? And they don't agree. I mean, some of them are very clear. You know, you say, Zachor, Shamor, Yom HaShabbat, observe the Shabbat. That's clear. Some of them are less clear. Yes. Yeah, so everybody agrees on 613. 613. No, I wouldn't even say that. You know, are there 600 they've all agreed to, and there's a question on 300? I'm sure there is. I just don't know what it is. Yep. Look, at the end of the day, there's numerous commandments within the Torah that are unpracticable today. Number one, they have to be in the land of Israel. And so for us, it's just not even a possibility. Or they apply to the temple or tabernacle, which is not a possibility. All right? But there's still plenty for us to do. I promise you, if you want to observe commandments, you've got plenty on the list. There's nothing to worry about. Okay? But many of them are no longer applicable because of something that's in contemporary society. When the temple is rebuilt, theoretically, I'm not looking forward to sacrifices, but theoretically, we'd go into the whole sacrificial system as outlined in Leviticus. 8 knots, 8 strands and 5 knots. I think it's on the page there. Yeah? Okay. But whether or not, look, so you are right. Is 613, is that the real number? Who knows? But it's a number we have traditionally settled on as in a symbolic way that says, I think its message at the end of the day is there's not 10. Okay? It's not 10 commandments. It's 613. Because Christianity deliberately said there's only 10, the others don't matter. Of course, they do matter, but they don't matter. They only matter when they want them to. So the commandment about don't lie with a man the way you would with a woman, suddenly that matters. That's not one of the 10, but suddenly that matters.
I always understood the word mitzvot to be a good deed that you can choose to do.
No.
And it was surprising to me to learn that it means a commandment that you should do.
So in Yiddish, again, this is how Yiddish and Hebrew interplay. All right, within Yiddish, it's become much more about the feelings of what you're doing here, and they're good deeds, and you can feel good about them. In Hebrew, that's not necessarily not true. The goal is when you're commanded to do them, but they should, hopefully they'll produce, like if you go out and you help people, you go out and you give money to tzedakah, you go out and you do a community service, we're given a gift by God. We generally feel good about that afterwards. It just happens. It's not the goal, but it is the outcome. This is one of those where it actually does work. Do, get prize. Okay. It actually works. When you help somebody in need, you feel better about yourself. But that's not, it is a commandment to do so. Giving charity is not what we do. We give tzedakah. Tzedakah, the root of the word tzedakah is tzaddik, is righteous, meaning it's the right thing to do. It's not an option to give charity, right?
Even if you're poor.
Even the poor are obligated to give charity. Now, obviously, to their ability. But everyone is obligated. That's the concept of mitzvah. When we say mitzvah, the root is tzivah, God commands.
So is there one of the 613 that says you're not supposed to eat shrimp or crab?
Well, it outlines, what it does is it says which fish are acceptable. It describes them, so nothing that's a scavenger, nothing that scavenges along the bottom of the sea. And then it also says it has to have fins and scales, not skins and fails. Yeah. Particularly with birds. That's really where it because the birds, there's no rule about it. The birds, it lists out these are not. You have to figure out what the distinction is between them. And essentially, the rabbis came up. Here's what they came up with on birds. It's bizarre. One toe has to be larger than the other, and they can't be birds of prey. But looking at the list, that's the commonality they found. All right. So that's mitzvah. What we have here are symbols. We're talking about symbols and the importance of symbols in life. The tzitzit are a symbol which reminds us of what we're supposed to do. So you've got two taluses. Most, I'm sure many of you know, some of you don't. There's two taluses. There's the talus I put on when I'm in prayer, but if you go to an Orthodox community, they're also wearing what they call tzitzit. The talus is under their clothes, and they wear that all day. And why? Because all day long you're confronted with, again, the Christian kids for a number of years were wearing the WWJD bracelets. What would Jesus do? What was the point of that? When I find myself in a moral dilemma, I stop and I think, what would Jesus do in this situation? Well, great idea, but we had it 2,000 years ago.
Is that why the Mormons wear special underclothing?
I would imagine it is to prevent, sexual behaviors, to remind oneself. That's my guess. I can't swear to it, but it would make sense. It's consistent theologically. All right? The way in which it's done is rabbinic. It's not Torah. Right. Now, Orthodox would say that was given at Sinai too. All right, so for online, there are different traditions between the Sephardi and the Ashkenaz, not on the talit, on the tefillin. The talit is pretty consistent. And by the way, when you're talking about a talit, you're talking about the fringes, because you can use any fabric you want. It's attach it to the corners of the garments. We did this with kids. I made a New York Yankees talit. Right? They all did their own thing. This one had a wrestling talit. This one had this. The garment is insignificant. It's about the fringes on the corners of the garment. Oh, so I'm repeating it because of people online. The question is this just for men, or can it be?
As conservatives, women will go to like on, anywhere kippah. So now I'm also commanded if I'm going to the ark and to the.
Right. So traditionally, it is aimed at men only. But let's be real. We have to understand it. You can't create anachronisms. All right. You have to understand it in its time. So historically, it was aimed at men only, and if you go to an Orthodox synagogue, that's exactly what you're going to find. In the more modern movements, what you're going to find is a statement of women are obligated just like men. Okay. By the way, I didn't use the word opportunity. In other words, for anything a man is obligated to, a woman is obligated to. But men have the choice too. But what it means is if you don't, you're breaking the law. You can choose to break any law you want in Judaism. But if you don't, you're breaking the law. It's an obligation. You don't get to have privileges without obligations. That's not the way.
I guess I'm coming at it from a different perspective. There's also a rule that women should not be wearing men's clothes, and that the talit is a men's clothes, and that by wearing a talit, you are actually violating the mitzvah.
So, great. Okay, so I'm going to repeat. So the perspective of that a talit is the garment of a man, and the Bible commands us not to cross-dress in a sense, okay? And so therefore one would not. And I remember Rabbi Simon Potok Hayim's brother giving a lecture on this topic. And he pointed this out, went through it. He says, you know what though, there are talitot that are very specifically feminine. You could get one that you would know a man wouldn't wear. You still wouldn't do it. My mom wouldn't either. Right. My mom wouldn't either. I get that. I think the reason they were saying that is that we have a requirement in the synagogue. If you lead in prayer and you're up on the bima, then you need to have a talit. The choir, by definition, is a leader in prayer. That's why you can't have non-Jewish people in the choir. We don't. But halachically, you cannot. It's why I don't go to Beth Yeshurun's Slichot service, because I do have non-Jews in the choir. Now, they can have as many non-Jews in the congregation as they want, but if they're leading in prayer, I'm not comfortable with that. I can't speak to that. The leader's Jewish. The choir director is not singing. The choir director is not engaged in prayer. All right? But to me, that's an issue. They are an extension of the chazan.
There are a whole lot of people now, particularly women, you're talking about what the talit is, the cloth or the design can be anything. There are a whole lot of people now who that is their business of designing and selling.
Right. It's becoming, I'm going to repeat. There's an industry now that has developed about people who design different kinds of garments that are very individualized, upon which the tzitzit can be placed. Look, I'm not, at the end of the day, I remember what my grandfather said to me, and my great-grandfather. He said to me, my job is to tell you what Jewish law says. Your job is to then work with that. Okay, all right? And each of us does. Each of us, although we understand this sense of commandment, each of us says, I'm going to do this and not that. The reality is the concept on the Reform movement of personal choice really extends to the most orthodox of people. They're still not doing certain things. Right? Everyone on some level is choosing. And a Reform rabbi explained that to me. And I had to stop and say, you know what, you're right. You're right. Right. Okay? All right. So, in as much as the fringes on the tallis are intended to look upon and remember the commandments. Until modern times at night, one could not do that. All right? And one didn't have, so as a result, the talit is not worn at night. The fringes are not worn at night because it couldn't fulfill the mitzvah. You don't want to do something in which you're not fulfilling the mitzvah. It's the opposite outcome. And then, yeah. What's that? It just doesn't serve the purpose. And right, it doesn't serve the purpose, and therefore in doing it is almost like, when you do it in that setting, it's almost like, I want to be more pious than you. Yom Kippur. Reason for that. The prayer Yom Kippur, which we need to, Kol Nidre, which we need to wear a tallis for, occurs before sundown. It has to be recited prior to sundown. Therefore, you're wearing a talit, and you just keep it on at that point. Again, the rabbis played with legal fiction where it suited them. They were also personal choice. That's what you see. You'll see when you recite this prayer, when you say the word tzitzit, the tradition is to kiss them. Okay, you'll see people do that. It's also an equalizing device. In the ancient world, the people who tended to put fringes on the garments of their clothing outside of the Jewish world were the wealthy. This democratized it. They borrowed the custom from the wealthy and said, everyone. Everyone does this. There's an equality here. When we say we're an egalitarian synagogue, it doesn't just mean about women and men, it means across the financial range as well. All those kinds of things. And then lastly, if you look at this page, you'll see a giant word emet at the end, towards the bottom of the page. And you'll notice when I finish, I go, Ani Adonai Elohechem emet. And then we repeat, Adonai Elohechem emet. Emet is the first word of the next paragraph, but we borrow it and apply it. Why? Per Rabbi Potok, one must add the word emet so that you're not conveying the words Ani Adonai Elohechem, I am the Lord your God. You don't want to be making that statement. And so you add emet to it as a way of saying, the truth is. You're saying, this is not about me. Okay? That's the point here. Because you finish the paragraph, Ani Adonai Elohechem, I am the Lord your God. Well, I'm not. Just in case you didn't know. My mother thought it was. She gave birth to the Messiah. That's a good Jewish mother. Okay. Yeah, of course she is. And I would say this with her present, or I wouldn't say it. Yes, she had a good sense of humor. All right. So that's the third paragraph. It's primarily about the tzitzit and commandments and covenant. So that's the third paragraph of Shema. If you remember then, the blessings around the Shema were creation, revelation, redemption. The redemption is the prayer that follows the Shema. All right? It has two major themes in this. The first paragraph, if you just take a look at what's at the bottom, it says, Adonai your God, truly this teaching is constant, well-founded, and enduring, righteous and trustworthy, beloved and cherished, desirable and pleasing, awe-inspiring and majestic, well-ordered and established, good and beautiful, and so incumbent upon us forever. What that basically is saying, Amen, to what we just said. All right? It takes the biblical text and adds an Amen to it in a lot of words. Right? Rashi would never say it like this. He liked as few words as possible. This is flowery. And then it goes on to this whole concept of God as Redeemer. The text is filled with examples within here of God's covenantal reliability. What you have going on in this paragraph is a hope for the future redemption. We're talking about redemption in the future. But at the same time, what we keep citing is redemption in the past as a way of couching the fact that God does redeem. And so we cite God as a redeemer as a way of saying God will redeem. This is what God does. And we have examples of God doing it in the past. That's the nature of this paragraph. And there's a particular focus on the Exodus. Most cultures have a founding story. For the Romans, it was Remus and Romulus they descended from powerful animals, and that was the nature of how they saw themselves. They were this powerful army. Rome saw themselves as Remus and Romulus descending from powerful animals in strength and power. The Jewish founding story is the Exodus. It is the story of slaves. We see ourselves as slaves who are redeemed by God. That's our founding story. That's our George Washington crossing the river. What's that? The Delaware. I'm going blank here. What's that? Right. Good. And that's our founding story. And by the way, it's really important to note, even if you convert in, it's still your founding story. In the same way we all sing about the Revolutionary War and the Star-Spangled Banner, and we borrow that story. Most of our descendants weren't here. But we've now adopted that as our founding story. The same thing is true with a convert who converts into Judaism. This is now their founding story in the same way. So the Exodus articulates who we are by remembering how we came into being, by being redeemed by a miraculous God, who then took us to Sinai, where we became a Mamlechet Kohanim and a Goy Kadosh, a nation of priests and a holy nation. The whole purpose of freeing us was to change to whom we were obligated. We were obligated to the king, now we're obligated to God. That's the story it's our founding story. Every year. It has an entire tradition that has arose around that founding. It is Independence Day, which we say shouldn't be celebrated with merely a barbecue. There somehow should be a lot more than that around Independence Day. Enough of my commentary. Yes. Yeah, and God warns the people in the book of Judges, the people request a king. All right? And it's a step back, and God initially says, you don't want that. If you have a king, it goes in through and says, if you get a king, they're going to take your sons and put them in the armies. They're going to take your daughters and put them to work in other ways. This is not going to be delightful. If you still want it, I'll give it to you. And they want it. Because all the nations around them had one.
Yeah, and what you were just saying, we're supposed to obey God, and I'm speaking in the second commandment. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt. You shall have no other gods before me, and if you do, that you will have to.
Right, and that's the constant definition of good and bad kings in the Bible, by the way. When it says a king was a good king, it means he followed God's laws and believed in God. When it says it's a bad king, he's someone who didn't do that. That's the definition of good and bad as defined in the Bible. All right. I want to look at in Lev Shalem. Look in the Siddur, the bottom right on page 158, where it says, liberated the people. This blessing ends in the past tense, Ga'al. Go'el would be present tense, Ga'al. All you do is change the vowels. That's how you get the present and past tense. Go'el redeems. Ga'al redeemed. Okay? That's what this is commenting on, or something. There's something in there somewhere. Ga'al Yisrael. So it says, this bracha, in contrast to most, concludes with a verb in the past tense. We can properly bless God for the redemptive acts that have already occurred. We can't bless God in a hope and prayer for what might happen. Okay? So the blessing is about what God has already done. But it implies that this is what God has done, therefore we have the right to expect such and such consistent behavior going forward. The covenant says God can expect of us, but we also can expect of God. We can expect of God that which God does. You set the pattern, we can expect you to be consistent. So, yes and no. It's like, when will the Messiah come? There are a couple understandings on this. Number one, because we understand God as Redeemer, the Messiah is going to come. Now, humanity through its behavior can influence that by making it happen sooner, but it can't change the fact that it's going to happen. Our power is to bring it about earlier, but that it will happen because that's who God is. Okay, does that kind of, yeah, okay? All right, any questions on that third blessing? So we have God we are now finished with God as creator, God as revealer, God as redeemer. We have framed it around, the Shema has all been framed around that. It's all based on a response to a biblical text, meaning the Shema, which is God speaking to us, and we create prayers around that. We now turn to the Amidah, in which we now talk to God. God has been speaking to us through Torah. We're now we're now praying to God. This is the dialogue that is constituted within the text. And that's called the Amidah. So we're now on 159. We all know the singing stuff. There are different melodies, but they all kind of convey something. It depends on the day of the week. Together with the Shema, the Amidah and the Shema make up the core of the morning and the evening services. There's no Shema in the afternoon because we do it when you rise up and when you lie down. But there's an Amidah in the middle, in the afternoon service. There is no service in the year without an Amidah. There are 5 services on Yom Kippur. We recite the Amidah 5 times out loud, 5 times silently. Okay? No service without an Amidah. This is the core. It is literally Amidah, Amod means to stand. It is the standing prayer. So guess what you need to do? Thank you. It has other names, however. It also is called the Shemona Esrei. Shemona Esrei means 18. Because originally, there were 18 blessings in it. There is now a 19th. And it's not, when I say now, I mean, the 19th was written by the rabbis in the first century. This is not something Rabbi Teller and Canon Levine came up with. This is rabbinic early times. The 19th blessing basically was, they had people coming into the service who were preaching against Judaism. And so they added a blessing that talked about, may they be cursed. And the person leading it would be required to say it, so it discouraged them from taking a leadership role. In other words, give them no hope. Take away all hope from these malshinim, these people who are sort of rebellious within. They would bring Christianity, and that's what they would bring. What's that? As Jesus' followers were infiltrating the synagogue, they wrote this to discourage them from coming, and certainly from discouraging them to take a lead role where they'd have to say something that negated themselves. So, just to be clear, they said curse them, or they said... No, it's not a curse. It's may they have no hope. It's a curse, but not in the way. Yes, it's like a Yiddish curse. May you grow like an onion and with your head in the ground. Right?
No hope in this particular thing, it's no hope in general.
Right, yeah.
But it is an anti-Christian.
It was meant, but you have to understand in these days, the Jews and the Christians were fighting for support of the Romans. All right? They were definitely at odds with one another. Jewish tradition and Christian tradition know of each other, and they're deliberately going like this. It's not an accident that there's different. Sorry, let me get back here. It's not an accident that the traditions went in opposite directions. They deliberately did this. When Jews put on a head covering, and they have for thousands of years, to honor God, what does a Christian do? What do you do when you go to a ball game? Take it off. You think that's an accident? Okay? And so they built it in as a way of saying, we don't want talk. You know, we heard somebody who comes to services was talking about Jesus recently. We don't want that. Okay? This is the place that we come to be able to focus on in a certain way with a certain mindset, to step away from the tsuruses that are in our lives and to focus on God. And that is a distraction from that ability. It's not here. It's in the weekday Amidah, and it's a paragraph of V'lamal shnim al tikva v'chol harisha kareged. It's in the weekday prayer book. It's one of the 13, and I'll go through that later.
Is it fair to say that the difference between the Shabbat Ezra of the weekday and the Shabbat Amidah is the weekday we're asking God to work, and we're not asking God to work on Shabbat?
I am going to discuss that, but that's one angle on it that's possible. Yeah, it is definitely there's a difference between the two. The development of the Amidah itself, how it came to be, is shrouded in mystery. This is because its origins are during the Persian rule in Israel, during sometime between 500 and when Cyrus comes until Alexander the Great arrives, during that period of time, and there's very little documentation during that time. And the result is, so we don't know exactly how it happened. Right? It's not mystical, it's simply not documented. Right? So we don't know. Originally, what you would find, what the rabbis constructed, were the 18 blessings. When I say the 18 blessings, Baruch Atah just lists out the blessings. And the person who was leading would take that list of blessings and write an opening paragraph to each blessing that reflected the theme. So each person would do it differently, construct a prayer that was, over time, it got standardized. And so now we have a prayer book in which we have all those blessings, but what we say prior to them, the introduction to them. So you would have a blessing, Baruch Atah Adonai Chonein Hadad, praise are you, a God who grants wisdom, and the person would write a whole section about wisdom before he said that blessing. We now have a Chonein Li'adam Da'at, you grant man wisdom and knowledge, right? And we have a standardized introduction to the blessing. Okay. So that's in terms. Over time, it became standardized, and then with the destruction of the temple, the order of all this, the rabbis fixed it all in the Mishnah. Once you got to Mishnaic times, they began to fix it, and even today, if you go into synagogues, it's relatively standardized. Even if you go to a Reform synagogue, you will find the same blessings. You might find what's before them a little bit different, but the structure is the same. Okay? Let's play a little. I don't know what we've been doing so far, but we'll play now. When you begin the Amidah, the tradition is to take 3 steps back, 3 steps forward. There's 6 words in the opening line, and so you do that. It was the way of when you entered a royal chamber, when you entered before a king, that was the way you entered. And so, of course, what do they do? You're entering before God, you're going to do the same thing. It's a cultural borrowing. Right? You're in the presence of God. You stand with your feet together through the entire Amidah. Okay? When you're doing it silently, you do it with your feet together all the way through. If the cantor is repeating it, technically, he's not allowed to move his feet through the whole thing in the repetition. That means I know when I would do Rosh Hashanah, when I was a cantor, I would stand with my feet together from the verse Baruch until the end of Sim Shalom. For 2.5 hours. I wore special socks to keep the blood flowing and everything else. But you don't move your feet. It's based on 2 things. One is we see the angels are described as standing on 1 foot, and so we recreate the experience of the angels. The other is to convey the message that this is what I'm focusing on. I'm not going anywhere. We're not allowed to interrupt the recitation of the Amidah in any way. So, for example, If somebody comes up to you during the Amidah and greets you, you're not even allowed to nod in response. You must ignore them, because then they become your attention as opposed to God. When I would stand out in the congregation, I made sure, I apologize online, that when I did it, because I didn't want to move, that I didn't stand here, I stood here. So if someone wanted to get into the row, they could do so. I knew they didn't know better, all right? But I didn't want to move even though they didn't know better. So I made sure they could get into the row without me having to move. All right? It is very clear that should King David come and greet you, you are forbidden in any way to respond to him, only if your life is in danger. So if Netanyahu comes and says hello, ignore him, not because of his political or anything, because that's what Judaism responds, whether, I don't care what your politics are, but that's what Judaism demands. Now, if an American president came, you would assume they don't know better, and it could be dangerous, and so therefore you would. In the cases where there's potential danger, it's different. The assumption is Jews would know, all right? And I didn't make that assumption, and so I moved to a place where they could do what they needed to do without me having to move. Right, but you get the idea of, it's the same thing as covering one's head. You're trying to create a zone of concentration that nothing will interfere with. That's really the goal. We face Jerusalem when we say this prayer. So most we face east. Most of the world we face east. In Israel, they face towards Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, they face towards the Temple Mount. Right? As you get closer and closer and closer, it's more specific. Now, mind you, the reality is it's a round planet. I have to tell you, it doesn't matter. And it's played out. I was in the synagogue in Dallas where they had the chance to buy a church for 1/3 of its cost. They were offering a $25 million property for $8 million, and they decided not to buy it because the sanctuary was facing the wrong direction, and it would cost money to move it. The reality is the Talmud is very clear. There are lots of options. For example, there's one ruling that says it shouldn't face east, because then you give the impression that you're facing the rising sun and worshiping it. And it says instead you should face southeast, just not to give that impression. So it's minhag, it's not law that you face east. If there's an alternative opinion in the Talmud, all right, it tells you something. For many things, but clearly it's not an absolute here. That is the tradition. Most of us face east. I was in camp. What did we make? The kids took the tiles and made mizrach, and it says east in Hebrew, and they took out of tiles and things like that. So that is the custom and the way most people practice. But it's not halakha, it's not law. All right. Does any of this surprise anybody so far? Okay. Saying the words. How do you say silently? How do you do this? The Amidah should be recited silently to oneself, based on the example of Hannah, Samuel's mother, in the Bible, where she's described in the following way. It says, Hannah spoke in her heart, only her lips moved, but her voice could not be heard. So you need to pronounce the words. It's not just an eye looking at the words with your eyes. You need to pronounce the word based on this model, but the person next to you shouldn't hear you. You can hear them humming and mumming, right? People do lots of things with lots of Jewish traditions, and so. Again, so yes.
So I understood that you should always read them and not recite them from memory?
The tradition is that's correct, but either way, you shouldn't allow distractions. So if you know it by heart, like I do, I cover my head and I go through it. I'm not going to make a mistake. I've been doing this for God knows how many years. It's like singing the Star Spangled Banner and making an error. And the rockets, orange glare, it's not happening. Okay, it's just not happening. Okay, but traditionally, you want to make sure you're fully focused. Moving the lips helps do that. Reading it can help do that. I have most of the High Holiday service memorized. If you do it long enough, it's just you'd have to have learning challenges not to. Okay. Okay, let's see. So the usual format for the Amidah is we do it silently, and then it's repeated. This was done because you didn't walk into a synagogue in here's my Siddur. Until the printing press, you couldn't find a Siddur. Right? So people had to memorize everything. Most people did not. And so what would happen is in the repetition, the cantor would recite the blessings and everyone would say, Amen. By doing that, I agree. By doing that, you fulfill your obligation to recite this prayer. So that's why it's repeated. For the assumption is within the community, there are those for whom they cannot do it. Now some would say, well, now that it's in writing, no, now that it's in writing, many people still can't do it. And so we repeat it anyway. However, that said, there are alternative ways of doing this. You've heard of the Hechi Kedusha, where we start together and finish silently. That assumes everybody can function together. It also, if you've ever been in an Orthodox synagogue where they basically can daven together, you'll notice what the repetition of the Amidah turns into is gossip time, chatting time. Because they've all done it already. It's like, I don't need to repeat this. I have to be there for Kedusha, because I didn't say it. So for Kedusha, does everybody sing? Minute Kedusha is over, it's like, which section? Do you want to sit in the sports section, the business section? You want to talk about stocks? This is the section, right? Politics is over there on the left. You can pick your side, whatever, sit inside. But that's what goes on in the Orthodox synagogue, because they've already fulfilled their obligation. All right, and so what has happened is this development of this sort of blend model, where we say the beginning together, and then do it silently. By the way, when we repeat it, this is, again, you see multiple different variations. You'll notice that we do the only part that when you repeat that we do together as a community is the Kedusha, because that you didn't say as a group. In your silent Amidah, you need a community. So you will see me while the first two blessings are being said, not standing with my feet together. I've already fulfilled that. And then I walk to the bima, put my feet together for the Kedusha. It's over, I sit down. So when the cantor is singing Baruch Atah Adonai, when David's doing it, I don't sing along. Traditionally, cantor did all sorts of chazanut for that. It isn't a congregational sing-along for there. Now, doesn't mean you can't, it doesn't break any law. There's no law about it, but that's not the tradition. So you will see. So the rabbi, his tradition is he does. My tradition is I don't. And the reality is there's nothing prohibiting him from doing it, and that's become his tradition. There's nothing wrong with that. But all right, but you'll see different models happening on the beam if you watch. Watch carefully. Okay, let's talk about the structure of the Amidah, the weekday Amidah in particular. The weekday, it'll take you forever to go through this, so I'm just, take my word for it, you can look at it later. The Amidah is structured as one might do with a teenager. Teenager wants to borrow the car. Hi, Dad. I love your tie. Your tie is amazing. It's the most beautiful tie I have ever seen. By the way, Dad, can I borrow the car? And thank you. That's how the Amidah is structured. 3 blessings of praise. The weekday then has 13 bakashot, 13 requests, and then it goes directly into modim anachnu lach, we thank you. Praise, requests, hodaot, thank yous. That is the structure of the Amidah. The 3 blessings of praise are in every Amidah all year long. The 3 blessings of thanks are in every Amidah all year long. What is distinct is what happens between them. So on a weekday, you have these 13 requests. On Shabbat, it is perceived that one should not be concerned with his own needs and should not be making requests, and therefore all 13 of those are gone. And instead there's one blessing, Mikadesh HaShabbat. There's a full 4-paragraph blessing about starting Yismach Moshe, and it finishes Mikadesh HaShabbat. That is a blessing of sanctification of Shabbat in place of the 13 requests. On Rosh Hashanah, what between the three blessings of praise and 3 blessings of thanks, in between you've got Malchuyot, Zichronot, and Shofrot. 3 blessings about the specific of the holiday. And at festivals, you got 1 blessing of praise of God in terms of the festivals. So the 3 at the beginning through Kedusha are consistent. Doesn't mean sometimes there's an addition, like on Rosh Hashanah we had Zochreinu L'chaim, but structurally it's the same. It's all about praise. The last 3 are always about thanks. What happens in between is what tells you what day you're at, where you are in the calendar. Any comments or thoughts? Okay, I've got about 2 minutes. I'm going to start with the first line of the Amidah. It's quiet. The top of page 159, Adonai Sifatai Tiftach Ufi Yagid Tehilatecha. Adonai, open my lips, Sifatai Tiftach, Ufi Yagid, and my mouth, let it sing your praises. Couple things. 1. So the first thing is this is an assumption, a theological assumption. We finish with a parallel verse. That indeed when we stand before God, there's an assumption of I'm speechless. It's so awe-inspiring that I can't even speak. I need God to open my lips so that I can engage in prayer. God is not the object of this prayer. God is participating and enabling us to do so. Because God's presence is so awe-inspiring as to make us unable to speak. So this line there is really trying to create that sense of partnership before you engage in prayer. Now there's another problem. Halakha, Jewish law says that between the blessing Ga'al Yisrael on the previous page, very bottom, and the word Baruch, no interruptions are permitted. No page announcement, nothing. No interruptions are permitted, and yet suddenly we find this biblical verse right smack in the middle. The rabbis must have felt, the later rabbis, the early rabbis said no interruptions. The later rabbis must have felt there's something so important about this verse that they're willing to break the earlier rabbinic ruling. All right? So we have to take a look at this verse in particular and understand its context. Let me see if I can find the words here. Yeah. It's a section from Psalms, and what it says is, Adonai, open my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. That's what we have. But that's not the end. It says, for you have no delight in sacrifice, you do not desire burnt offerings. The rabbis were saying that it's time for sacrifice to go away, that this is so important. It's not a matter of that prayer is equal to sacrifice. By innuendo, they were saying this is better. We're about to engage in the Amidah, which replaces sacrifice. This is better. And to make that statement is so important that will break the earlier rabbinic ruling. Yeah, it's in a Musaf service as well on Shabbat. There's a call for a return to sacrificial system. It's not always consistent. You're right. By the way, what has the conservative movement done with that? In the Amidah, what they've done is all they do is change tenses. It says, we hope for the day when there will be a return to sacrifice. In the conservative prayer book, it says, we remember the time when they used to sacrifice. Right. They changed the tense. What? No. In the old in the Silverman Siddur, the old conservative prayer book, that's exactly the case. What they did is they maintained the Hebrew, but in the English changed it so that people wouldn't know. All right? But if you look at the prayer books we use today, they've changed the Hebrew as well. They've changed the Hebrew as well. The Orthodox have left it. They do hope for the day. But again, you've all heard me say this, and with this I'll finish. The sacrificial system is not as primitive as we want to think. At the end of the day, we're about to have a special Thursday in about 3 weeks, all right, in which we'll go to H-E-B, buy something that's frozen, burn it in our ovens, and eat it. They ate their sacrifices. Okay? We have cleaned it up. What we do, in a sense, is more cruel than what they did. We get to pretend turkeys grow in HEB. We don't have to think that it ever walked the planet. We clean it. We make it sensitive. We don't have to worry about those things. No one wants to think that this was a turkey. The turkey you eat is not the same turkey that walks around. It's a different being. My turkey grows in HEB. Okay? So it's not as primitive. When you think of sacrifices, it's not as primitive as we think. Yes, it is barbecue in a sense. Okay? Now, that doesn't mean I want to return to that being the way in which I relate to God. That's my distinction. That's not the way I want to do it. I want prayer as my mode of operation. Psychologically, it works better for me. But sacrificial system is not primitive any more than what we do today. Happy Thanksgiving on that note. Please note that we're not meeting next week. We are, and then the Israeli consulate is coming that following week, and then we meet again on the 24th.
The Israeli consulate, though, anybody can come to that?
Yes. They will be checking. They will be checking at the door. I don't know if they're going to require reservations because of security, but just watch for. We'll be sending out information. Yeah. Yeah, the same woman who's been. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.